Lonely CEO pretends to be a waiter. A single mom's kindness changes everything. What would you do if a stranger showed you kindness when you had nothing left to give? When Rachel Bennett walked into that small diner with her son on a cold November evening, she had no idea the tired waiter serving her coffee was actually a millionaire in disguise. She had $12 in her wallet, a broken-down car, and medical bills she couldn't pay. He had everything money could buy, except the one thing she gave him freely. This is the true story of how one act of compassion changed two lives forever. Stay with me, because what happens next will restore your faith in humanity. Rachel Bennett woke up at 5:30 in the morning, just like she did every day. The alarm clock beside her bed was older than her son, and it rattled loud enough to wake the neighbors. But Rachel didn't need an alarm anymore. Her body had learned to wake on its own, trained by years of early shifts and endless worry. She lay there for just a moment, staring at the ceiling of her small apartment. The paint was peeling in the corner, and she'd been meaning to fix it for months, but there were always more important things. Always something more urgent. Always another bill that couldn't wait. Through the thin wall, she could hear her 8-year-old son, Michael, breathing softly in his sleep. That sound was the only thing that made mornings bearable. As long as he was safe, as long as he was healthy, she could face another day. Rachel pulled herself out of bed and walked quietly to the kitchen. The apartment was small, just 2 bedrooms, a bathroom, and a combined kitchen and living area. But it was theirs. She'd fought hard to keep it after the divorce 3 years ago. The divorce. She rarely let herself think about those days anymore. About Daniel, who promised to be there forever, who'd left when things got hard, who'd moved to another state and sent a check once in a while, when he remembered, who'd never even called on Michael's last birthday. She pushed the thoughts away and started making breakfast. Oatmeal. Again. It was cheap, it was filling, and Michael had stopped complaining about it months ago. That broke her heart more than anything, that her 8-year-old son had learned not to ask for things because he knew they couldn't afford them. "Mom?" Michael's voice came from behind her. Rachel turned and smiled. He stood in the doorway in his pajamas, his dark hair sticking up in every direction, his eyes still heavy with sleep. "Good morning, sweetheart. You're up early." "I wanted to finish my homework before school," he said, walking over to give her a hug. "I forgot about the math problems last night." Rachel held him close for a moment, breathing in the scent of his shampoo. These hugs were everything. They were the reason she worked double shifts at the diner. The reason she skipped meals so he could have seconds. The reason she kept going when every part of her wanted to give up. "Sit down and I'll help you after breakfast," she said, running her fingers through his hair. "We've got time." They ate together at the small kitchen table, and Rachel helped him work through long division. Math had never been her strong subject, but she'd learned alongside him, staying up late watching tutorial videos on her phone so she could be the mother he needed. At 7:15, they walked to the bus stop together. November in Chicago was cold, and Rachel pulled Michael's jacket tighter around him. She'd bought it at a thrift store 2 weeks ago, and it was a little too big, but he'd grow into it. That's what she told herself. He'd grow into it, and they'd get one more year out of it before they needed to find another. "Mom?" Michael looked up at her as they waited. "Can I ask you something?" "Always, baby." "What is it? Why do you work so much?" The question hit her like a punch to the stomach. She knelt down to his level, taking his hands in hers. "Because I want to give you the best life I can," she said softly. "I know it's hard sometimes, with me working late and you staying with Mrs. Chen after school. But everything I do for you. You know that, right?" He nodded, his eyes serious. "I know. I just miss you sometimes." Rachel felt tears burning behind her eyes, but she blinked them back. She couldn't cry. Not now. Not in front of him. "I miss you too, sweetheart. So much. But I promise, things are going to get better. We just have to keep being strong, okay?" "Okay," he said, and then the bus rounded the corner. She watched him climb aboard, watched him wave at her from the window, watched the bus disappear down the street, and then she stood there for a moment longer, letting herself feel the weight of it all. The medical bills from Michael's emergency appendectomy last year, the rent that went up every 12 months, the car that needed repairs she couldn't afford, the electricity bill that was overdue, the student loans from the nursing degree she'd never finished because Daniel left, and someone had to work full-time immediately. She pulled her phone from her pocket and checked her bank account. $243 until her next paycheck in 5 days. Rent was due in 3. Rachel closed her eyes and took a deep breath. She'd figure it out. She always did. She had to. At 7:45, she arrived at Miller's Diner, where she'd worked as a waitress for the past 2 years. It wasn't glamorous, but the tips were decent, and her boss, Mr. Miller, was kind. He let her take leftover food home at the end of her shift, which saved her grocery money. She tied her apron, checked her reflection in the bathroom mirror, and put on her best smile. No matter how tired she was, no matter how worried, her customers would never know. She'd learned that lesson early. People tip better when you smile. The morning rush was the same as always. Coffee, eggs, toast, more coffee. She moved through the diner like a dance she'd memorized, refilling cups before they were empty, remembering how people liked their eggs, chatting with regulars who knew her by name. But today her mind kept drifting back to that number in her bank account. $243. It wasn't enough. It was never enough. And as she poured another cup of coffee for another customer, Rachel Bennett wondered, not for the first time, how much longer she could keep this up. It was almost 2 in the afternoon when the stranger walked in. Rachel was wiping down table 6 when the bell above the door chimed. She looked up out of habit, her waitress smile already in place, and saw a man standing in the entrance. He was tall, maybe late 40s, with gray beginning to thread through his dark hair. He wore jeans and a simple navy sweater, nothing flashy, nothing that screamed money. But Rachel had worked in service long enough to recognize quality when she saw it. The watch on his wrist probably cost more than her car. The shoes were Italian leather. The way he carried himself spoke of boardrooms and first-class flights. What was someone like him doing in Miller's Diner? He chose the booth in the far corner, away from the windows, away from the other customers. He sat down heavily, like a man carrying weight that had nothing to do with his body. Rachel grabbed a menu and walked over. "Good afternoon," she said warmly. "Coffee?" He looked up at her, and she was struck by his eyes. They were gray like storm clouds and profoundly sad. "Please," he said quietly. "Black." Rachel poured his coffee and set the menu in front of him. "Take your time. I'll be back to take your order in a few minutes." She left him alone and went back to her other tables, but her eyes kept drifting to the corner booth. The man sat there, not looking at the menu, just staring out the window at the Chicago street beyond. His coffee went cold, untouched. 20 minutes passed. Rachel refilled his cup. "Have you decided on anything?" she asked gently. He looked at the menu for the first time. "What do you recommend?" "The meatloaf is good," Rachel said. "Comes with mashed potatoes and green beans. Or if you want breakfast, the pancakes are the best in the city. My son always asks for them when we come here together." She didn't know why she mentioned Michael. It just slipped out. The man's expression softened slightly. "You have a son?" "Yes, sir. He's 8. Smart as a whip and twice as stubborn." She smiled, the way she always did when she talked about Michael. "That must be wonderful," the man said quietly. "I'll have the meatloaf." Rachel wrote it down and headed to the kitchen. When she brought his food 15 minutes later, she noticed he'd been crying. He'd wiped the tears away, but his eyes were red. She pretended not to notice. "Here you go," she said, setting the plate in front of him. "Can I get you anything else?" "No, thank you. This is perfect." Rachel left him alone, but her heart ached for reasons she couldn't name. There was something about this man, sitting alone in the corner booth, that reminded her of herself. The loneliness, the exhaustion, the sense of carrying something too heavy to share. She watched him pick at his food, barely eating. When her shift supervisor Linda walked by, Rachel leaned over. "Who is that guy?" she whispered. Linda glanced at the corner booth. "No idea. Why?" "Just wondering. He seems, I don't know, sad." Linda shrugged. "Not our business, honey. Just keep his coffee filled." But Rachel couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. When she brought his check an hour later, she set it down gently. "I hope everything was okay," she said. The man looked up at her. "It was excellent. Thank you." He pulled out his wallet, and Rachel caught a glimpse of platinum credit cards, thick bills. He left a $100 bill on the table for a $22 meal. "Sir, this is too much," Rachel said quickly. "Keep it," he said, standing. "You were kind to me. That's worth more than money." He walked out before she could protest, and Rachel stood there holding the $100 bill, her hands shaking. This would cover the electric bill. This would buy groceries for 2 weeks. This was a miracle. But as she watched the stranger disappear down the street, she felt something else too. Concern, worry, the sense that she'd just met someone who needed help as much as she did, even if his problems looked different from the outside. That night, as she tucked Michael into bed, Rachel found herself thinking about the sad man in the corner booth, about the emptiness in his eyes, about the way he'd said, "That must be wonderful," when she mentioned her son. "Mom," Michael's voice pulled her back. "You okay?" "I'm fine, baby. Just thinking." "About what?" "About how lucky I am to have you," she said, kissing his forehead. "Even when things are hard, I have you, and that makes everything worth it." Michael smiled and closed his eyes. Within minutes, he was asleep. Rachel stood in the doorway for a long time, watching him breathe. The $100 bill was in her pocket, and tomorrow she'd pay the electric bill. Tomorrow things would be a little easier, but she couldn't stop thinking about the stranger, and she wondered if he had anyone in his life who looked at him the way she looked at Michael, anyone who made his life worth it. She had a feeling the answer was no. 3 days later, Rachel was running late for her evening shift. Michael's school had called. He'd gotten into a fight defending another kid from a bully, and she'd had to leave work early to pick him up. Now she was scrambling to make up the hours, racing into Miller's diner at 4:30 instead of 4. "I'm so sorry, Mr. Miller," she said breathlessly as she tied her apron. "It won't happen again." Mr. Miller, a stout man with kind eyes and a gray mustache, waved her off. "Family comes first, Rachel. Always. How's Michael?" "He's fine. Suspended for 2 days, but I'm proud of him. He stood up for someone who couldn't stand up for themselves." "That's because he's got a good mother," Mr. Miller said. "Now get out there. We've got a new guy starting today, and he's going to need some help." "New guy?" Rachel looked around the diner. They hadn't hired anyone in months. "Yeah, started this afternoon. Said he needed the work. He's in the back." Rachel walked toward the kitchen, curious, and then she stopped dead in her tracks. Standing at the coffee station, wearing a waiter's uniform that didn't quite fit, was the stranger from the corner booth. The sad man with the expensive watch and the $100 tips. He looked up and saw her. For a moment, neither of them moved. "You," Rachel said finally. "What are you doing here?" He had the grace to look embarrassed. "Working." "Working? You left me a $100 tip 3 days ago, and now you're working as a waiter?" "I needed a change," he said quietly. "I needed to do something real." Mr. Miller appeared beside them. "You two know each other?" "He was a customer," Rachel said, still staring at the stranger. "A generous one." "Well, now he's James, our newest waiter," Mr. Miller said cheerfully. "Rachel, can you show him the ropes? He's a little rusty." Rachel wanted to ask 1,000 questions. She wanted to demand answers. But she was at work, and Mr. Miller was her boss, and this strange man was apparently her new co-worker. "Fine," she said. "Come on, James, let's start with the basics." For the next 2 hours, Rachel showed James how to work the floor, how to take orders, how to remember who wanted cream in their coffee, how to carry 3 plates at once without dropping them. He was terrible at first, clumsy, uncertain, nothing like the confident man who'd walked in wearing Italian leather shoes. But he was trying, genuinely trying. During their break, they sat at the back booth, and Rachel finally asked the question that had been burning in her mind. "Why are you really here?" James was quiet for a long moment. He stared at his hands that looked like they'd never done manual labor, hands that were already red from carrying hot plates. 3 days ago, he said finally, "I came into this diner planning to never leave." Rachel's breath caught. "What do you mean?" "I was going to eat one last meal, and then I was going to go back to my hotel room and end it all." His voice was flat, matter of fact. "I had the pills in my pocket. I had the note written. I was done." "James." "But then you asked me about the food," he continued, "and you mentioned your son. And you smiled at me like I was a person, not a problem. And I sat in that booth for an hour, and I watched you work. I watched you be kind to every single person who walked through that door. I watched you laugh, even though you looked exhausted. I watched you take that $100 like it was going to save your life. Rachel felt tears in her eyes. And I realized, James said, that I'd spent so much time in boardrooms and on conference calls and in buildings made of glass and steel that I'd forgotten what it was like to be human, to be real, to connect with people. And I went back to my hotel room, and I flushed the pills down the toilet, and I tore up the note. And I decided I wanted to be someone different, someone real. So you, what, came a waiter? I wanted to understand, he said. I wanted to see what life was like for people who work hard for every dollar, people who don't have the luxury of giving up, people like you. Rachel didn't know what to say. This man, this stranger, had been on the edge of death, and somehow she'd pulled him back without even knowing it. I'm not who you think I am, she said quietly. I'm not some hero. I'm barely surviving. That's exactly why you're a hero, James said. Because you keep going. Because you show up for your son every single day. Because you're kind even when you're breaking inside. That's real strength. That's something I never had. They sat in silence for a moment, and then Mr. Miller called them back to work. For the rest of the evening, Rachel and James worked side by side. She taught him how to balance a tray, how to deal with difficult customers, how to smile even when your feet were killing you. And he listened, really listened. Like every word she said mattered. When the shift ended at 11, they walked out together into the cold Chicago night. Thank you, James said, for today. For 3 days ago, for giving me a reason to keep breathing. Rachel looked at him, really looked at him. Behind the expensive clothes and the corporate veneer was just a man, a broken, lonely man who was trying to find his way back to himself. We all need a reason, she said softly. I'm glad I could be yours. She walked to her car, leaving him standing in the parking lot. And as she drove home to Michael, she wondered about the mysterious James, who'd given up everything to find something real. She had a feeling their story was just beginning. 2 weeks later, Rachel's world shattered. It happened on a Tuesday. She'd been at the diner since 6 in the morning, pulling a double shift because Linda had called in sick. James was there too. He'd been showing up every day, learning, getting better, becoming part of the team. They'd developed an easy rhythm, working together like they'd been doing it for years. At 3 in the afternoon, Rachel's phone rang. The school. Her hands went cold as she answered. Hello? Ms. Bennett, this is Principal Morgan. I'm calling about Michael. Is he okay? What happened? He's in the nurse's office. He collapsed during recess. We called an ambulance. You need to get to Memorial Hospital right away. The phone slipped from Rachel's hand. She didn't remember grabbing her purse, didn't remember telling Mr. Miller she had to leave, didn't remember the drive to the hospital. All she knew was that her son, her whole world, was in danger and she couldn't breathe. She ran through the emergency room doors and found Michael in a bed, hooked up to monitors, looking so small and pale it broke her heart. Mom, he whispered when he saw her. I'm here, baby. I'm right here. She took his hand, held it tight, felt how cold his fingers were. A doctor appeared, young, professional, kind-faced. Ms. Bennett. I'm Dr. Patel. Michael had a seizure. We're running tests now to determine the cause. A seizure. But he's always been healthy. I know this is frightening, Dr. Patel said gently, but we're going to figure out what's going on. We need to keep him overnight for observation and run some additional tests in the morning. Rachel nodded numbly. Overnight. More tests, more bills she couldn't pay. She stayed by Michael's bed as they moved him to a room. She held his hand as he drifted in and out of sleep. She watched the monitors, counting every heartbeat, every breath, praying to a God she wasn't sure she believed in anymore. At 8 o'clock, a woman from billing appeared. Ms. Bennett, we need to discuss payment. Your insurance has a $5,000 deductible, and you'll need to pay half before we can proceed with tomorrow's tests. $2,500. Rachel felt the room spin. I don't have that, she said quietly. I have $200 in my account. That's it. The billing woman's expression didn't change. We can discuss payment plans, but we do need a deposit of at least $1,000. I don't have it, Rachel repeated, her voice breaking. I don't have $1,000. I don't know how I'm going to pay rent next week. I don't know how I'm going to buy groceries. My son is lying in that bed, and I can't help him because I don't have enough money." The tears came then, hard and ugly and full of 3 years of holding everything together. She covered her face with her hands and sobbed in the hallway of Memorial Hospital while strangers walked past, while her son slept in a room she might not be able to afford, while the whole world kept spinning and she was drowning. "Rachel." She looked up. James stood there, still in his waiter uniform, breathing hard like he'd been running. "How did you?" Mr. Miller told me. "I drove straight here." He looked at the billing woman. "How much does she need?" "Sir, this is a private matter." "How much?" His voice was firm, commanding. Nothing like the uncertain waiter she'd been training. $1,000 for the deposit, $2,500 to cover her portion of the estimated costs. James pulled out his wallet. He handed the billing woman a credit card. "Charge $5,000. That should cover any additional expenses." "James, no," Rachel said, standing. "You can't." "Yes, I can." You looked at her and his eyes were fierce. "You saved my life, Rachel. Let me help save your son's. You don't have $5,000. You're a waiter." "No," he said quietly. "I'm not." The truth hit her then. The expensive clothes, the confident way he'd handled the billing woman, the credit card that had no limit. "Who are you?" she whispered. "Someone who forgot what matters," James said. "Someone who needed you to remind him. Please, let me do this." Rachel wanted to be proud. She wanted to refuse, but Michael was in that room, and he needed tests, and she needed help. "Okay," she whispered. "Thank you." The billing was sorted, the tests were scheduled, and James sat with Rachel in the waiting room while Michael slept. Neither of them saying much, both of them understanding that something had shifted between them. At midnight, Dr. Jem Patel returned with results. "It's epilepsy," she said. "Juvenile onset. We can manage it with medication. He'll need to take it daily, and we'll need to monitor him regularly, but he's going to be okay." Rachel felt her legs give out. James caught her, held her steady. "He's going to be okay," she repeated, and this time the tears were relief. Dr. Patel smiled. "He's a strong kid, and he's got a strong mother. We'll get him started on medication tomorrow, and he can go home in the afternoon." When the doctor left, Rachel turned to James. "I'll pay you back," she said. "Every penny. It might take me years, but I'll pay you back." "I don't want your money," James said quietly. "Then what do you want?" He was silent for a long moment. "I want to tell you the truth. About who I am, about why I was in that diner the day we met, about everything." Rachel nodded. "Okay, tell me." And so, in the quiet waiting room of Memorial Hospital, while her son slept down the hall and the city breathed outside, James told her everything. "My name is James Thornton," he began, "and I'm the CEO of Thornton Industries. You've probably seen our buildings downtown, the ones with the blue glass windows. We manufacture medical equipment. We're worth about $800 million. Rachel stared at him. "You're serious?" "Completely." He ran a hand through his hair. 5 years ago, I was married. I had a daughter, Emma. She was 3 years old and she was everything. She had these bright green eyes and this laugh that sounded like bells. She loved butterflies and pancakes, and when I read her bedtime stories." His voice cracked, and Rachel reached across the table, taking his hand. "My wife, Catherine, died in a car accident when Emma was 2. Drunk driver. She died instantly, and I fell apart. But I had Emma, so I held it together. I threw myself into work, hired the best nanny money could buy, built my company into an empire. I thought I was doing the right thing. Providing for my daughter, securing her future." "What happened?" Rachel asked softly. "I worked too much. I was never home. Emma's nanny, Margaret, raised her while I was in board meetings and conference calls and business dinners. And then last year, Emma got sick. Leukemia." He paused, his hand shaking. "I paid for the best doctors, the best treatments. I would have given every penny I had to save her. But money can't cure everything." Rachel felt tears streaming down her face. "She died 6 months ago," James continued. "She was 7 years old, and in those final weeks, when I finally stayed home, when I finally put down my phone and just sat with her. You know what she said to me? She said, "I wish I'd known you better, Daddy. James, my daughter died not knowing me because I was too busy making money, too busy being important, too busy to be her father." He looked at Rachel with devastated eyes. After the funeral, I sold my house. I moved into a hotel. I stopped going to the office. My board of directors is probably having a fit, but I don't care. I didn't care about anything. I just wanted the pain to stop. That's why you came to the diner. I'd been planning it for weeks. I had everything arranged. My will was updated, my company's future secured. I just needed to work up the courage to actually do it. And then I walked into Miller's Diner, and there you were. James, I didn't do anything special. I was just doing my job. No, he said firmly. You saw me. You actually saw me. You actually saw me. Not my money, not my position, not what I could do for you. You saw a sad man sitting alone, and you were kind. And when you talked about your son, your whole face lit up. You were exhausted and struggling, and you still found joy in being his mother. You still showed up for him. You were everything I failed to be for Emma. Rachel squeezed his hand. You didn't fail her. You loved her. You did everything you could. I gave her everything except myself, James said. And now she's gone, and I can't get that time back. I can't tell her I'm sorry. I can't be the father she deserved. They sat in silence for a moment, both of them crying quietly in the empty hospital cafeteria. So I became a waiter, James finally continued. I wanted to understand what it meant to work hard, to struggle, to live a real life. I wanted to be around people who knew what mattered. And I found you. Again, why didn't you tell me the truth? Because I liked who I was when I was just James. Not CEO James, not millionaire James. Just a guy learning to carry plates and make coffee and have real conversations. And you treated me like a friend. Like an equal. Nobody's treated me like that in years. Rachel wiped her eyes. I still don't understand why you paid Michael's medical bills. That's an incredible amount of money. Because I can't save my daughter, James said simply, but maybe I can help save someone else's son. Maybe I can do one thing right. Maybe I can use my money for something that actually matters instead of just making more money. You're not a bad person, James. You're a heartbroken father who's trying to find meaning after losing everything. And you're a single mother who shows up every single day, even when it's hard. Even when you're scared. Even when you don't know how you're going to pay the bills or feed your kid or keep the lights on. You're the strongest person I've ever met, Rachel. I don't feel strong, she admitted. Most days I feel like I'm barely holding on. That's what makes you strong, James said. Real strength isn't never being afraid. It's being terrified and doing it anyway. It's loving your son so much that you work 3 jobs. It's showing kindness to strangers even when you're breaking inside. It's surviving when giving up would be easier. They talked for hours that night. About Emma and Michael. About loss and fear and hope. About the strange way their lives had intersected. 2 broken people finding each other in a diner on a Tuesday afternoon. And by the time the sun started to rise, Rachel understood something important. James hadn't saved her. They'd saved each other. 3 months later, Michael was thriving. The medication controlled his seizures perfectly, and he was back in school, back to being a regular 8-year-old who complained about homework and loved video games and told terrible jokes at the dinner table. Rachel stood in front of a mirror, adjusting the collar of a blouse she'd bought specifically for today. It was simple but professional, and it had cost more than she would have spent on herself 6 months ago. But things were different now. Everything was different now. There was a knock at her apartment door. When she opened it, James stood there in a suit, looking more like the CEO he actually was, and less like the uncertain waiter she'd trained. "Ready?" he asked. "I think so," Rachel said nervously. "Are you sure about this?" "Completely sure. Come on." They drove to Thornton Industries together. Rachel had been inside the building before. James had given her a tour 2 weeks ago. But today felt different. Today was her first official day. James had offered her a job as Director of Community Outreach. The position didn't require a college degree, just compassion, dedication, and an understanding of what real people needed. The salary was more than she'd made in 3 years at the diner. "I can't accept this," she'd said when he first proposed it. "It's charity." "It's not charity," James had insisted. "It's good business. I'm restructuring the company to focus on what matters. Medical equipment that helps people, not just generates profit. Community programs, scholarships for single parents trying to finish their education, employee benefits that actually support families. I need someone who understands these issues from the inside, someone who's lived them. That's you. James, you saved my life, Rachel. Let me help you build yours, not as a handout, as a partner, as a friend." So she'd said yes. She'd given notice at Miller's Diner, though she still stopped by for coffee every week, and Mr. Miller treated her like a daughter. She'd enrolled in online classes to finish her nursing degree. She'd moved to a better apartment in a safer neighborhood, where Michael had his own room and a yard to play in. But the biggest change was Michael himself. He'd met James several times now, and they'd formed an unlikely friendship. James taught him chess and took him to museums and listened when he talked about school and friends and all the things 8-year-olds cared about. One evening, as Rachel was tucking Michael into bed in their new apartment, he'd said something that made her cry. "Mom, is James going to be around for a while?" "I think so, sweetheart." "Why?" "Because I like him. He reminds me of what I think a dad should be like." Rachel had called James that night and told him what Michael had said. He'd cried too. "I don't want to replace his father," James had said, "but I'd be honored to be in his life. If that's okay with you." "It's more than okay." Now, standing in the lobby of Thornton Industries, Rachel took a deep breath. James squeezed her shoulder. "You've got this," he said. "You're going to change lives here, just like you changed mine." Her first day was overwhelming but wonderful. She met her team, 4 people dedicated to community programs. She reviewed proposals for medical equipment donations to underfunded hospitals. She began planning a scholarship fund for single parents. She started building something that mattered. At lunch, James took her to the executive cafeteria, a far cry from Miller's Diner, but they both agreed the coffee wasn't nearly as good. "I've been thinking about something," James said as they ate. "Emma's birthday is next week. She would have been 8, Michael's age." "I'm so sorry, James." "Don't be. I want to start a foundation in her name. The Emma Thornton Foundation for Childhood Epilepsy Research. I want to fund research, support families, make sure no parent has to choose between their child's health and paying rent." Rachel's eyes filled with tears. "That's beautiful. I want you to run it," James said. "Alongside your work here, I can't think of anyone better. You're giving me too much, too many opportunities." "I'm giving you what you've earned," James said firmly. "You worked 3 jobs to support your son. You showed kindness to a stranger who was planning to die. You remind me every single day what it means to be human. You're not getting charity, Rachel. You're getting what you've always deserved." That evening, Rachel picked up Michael from his new after-school program, a program she'd helped design at Thornton Industries for employees' children. He ran to her with a painting he'd made. "Look, Mom, I painted our family." Rachel looked at the picture. There was a woman with brown hair, a boy with a big smile, Michael, and a man with gray hair standing beside them, all 3 holding hands. "Who's this?" she asked, pointing at the man, though she already knew. "That's James," Michael said matter-of-factly. "He's part of our family now, right?" Rachel looked up and saw James standing in the doorway of the after-school room watching them. The sadness that had haunted his eyes that first day in the diner was gone. In its place was something she'd never expected to see. Hope. "Yeah, baby," Rachel said, pulling Michael close. "He's part of our family now." That night, after Michael was asleep, Rachel and James sat on her apartment balcony, looking out at the Chicago skyline. "Do you ever think about that day?" Rachel asked. "The day you walked into the diner?" "Every day," James said. "It was the worst day of my life and the best day of my life. The day I almost gave up and the day I found a reason to keep going." "I was having the worst day too," Rachel admitted. "I was down to my last $12. I didn't know how I was going to make rent. I was terrified and exhausted and ready to break. And now," Rachel smiled, "now I have a job I love. My son is healthy. I'm going back to school. I have a friend who believes in me." She looked at James. Now I have hope, real hope. And I never thought I'd have that again. Neither did I, James said quietly. Funny how life works. How two broken people can find each other and somehow become whole. We're not broken anymore, Rachel said. We're healing, together. James reached over and took her hand, not romantically, not yet anyway, but as friends, as people who understood each other's pain and chose to build something beautiful from it. Thank you, he said, for seeing me that day, for being kind when I needed it most, for giving me a reason to live. Thank you, Rachel said, for showing me that asking for help isn't weakness, for proving that good people still exist, for being there when Michael needed you, when I needed you. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the city lights twinkle in the darkness, and Rachel Bennett, single mother, former waitress, survivor of 1,000 small battles, realized something profound. She'd spent so long being strong alone that she'd forgotten how good it felt to be strong together. Sometimes the greatest miracle isn't escaping your struggles. It's finding someone who makes those struggles worth fighting through. Sometimes the person you save ends up saving you right back. And sometimes when you think you have nothing left to give, the smallest act of kindness can change everything, not just for the person receiving it, but for the person giving it too. This story reminds us of a profound truth. We never know the battles others are fighting. The stranger sitting alone in a restaurant might be fighting demons we can't see. The single mother working 3 jobs might be one unexpected bill away from disaster. The wealthy executive might be drowning in loneliness despite all his success. But kindness costs us nothing. Compassion takes no money. Seeing people truly seeing them requires only that we pay attention. Rachel's simple kindness to a sad stranger didn't just save James's life. It transformed both their futures. It gave Michael a mentor. It gave James a purpose. It proved that human connection is worth more than any amount of money. When we choose kindness, even when we're struggling, we create ripples we may never see. We become part of someone else's survival story. We prove that the world isn't as cold as it sometimes seems. So be kind to the waitress who looks tired. Smile at the person who seems sad. See the human being behind the uniform, behind the wealth, behind the struggle. You never know, your kindness might be the miracle someone needs to keep going. If this story touched your heart, please hit the like button and share it with someone who needs hope today. Subscribe for more stories that restore your faith in humanity. And leave a comment telling me about a time when someone's kindness changed your life, or when you changed someone else's. Remember, we're all fighting battles nobody knows about. Let's be kind, always.